all the molecules, all the atoms, subatomic particles, everything has limitation. So we are caught, but the thing is that we think that is real. And that's where the problem comes in. Because when we realize that that is not the case, then our potential becomes infinite. Then you are in an infinite potential zone. And then we are not limited by the limited pleasures and things like that. So one thing we discussed in the past, that our true nature is the consciousness. We are not the body, we are not the mind, we are not the intellect, because we can observe those things. In materialism, in the material world, there is always a triology, they call, right? Basically, there is an observer, there is observed, and the process of observation that happens. So with the three things, that is a must for a material thing to exist. Without that, material world does not exist. In material world, there is a duality. And the interaction between the two people, or the two objects, or a person and an object, all these things is a continuously happening. And the process that is taking place in between, that is the fundamental of materialism. So once you live the life of materialism, you have to have an object. Even if you want to have a pleasure, you have to have an object. Without object, you cannot have a pleasure. So all your pleasures are dependent on the objects. But objects themselves are changing all the time. So when the objects are changing, obviously your pleasure will be changing too. The same beer, 5 degrees more or 5 degrees less, is not going to give you the same pleasure. Same girl may be more beautiful right now, 15 years later, is not the same anymore. So everything keeps on changing. So the pleasure that you try to derive is always going to keep on changing. And the thing is that we are so occupied on believing that this is where the pleasure is, so we keep chasing the objects. So we keep chasing the object. One object stops giving you the pleasure, so we look for another object, and then another object, until we die. Basically, nothing comes out of it. So when we identify ourselves with the BMI, that's where all these problems come. But, like I said, the process of, body, mind and intellect.
Body mass.
Body mass index.
Always.
And it's going to be even more difficult for me because I am a physician, so BMI for me, BMI will be BMI, right?
Automatically.
Yeah, automatically you think that. But these are the terminologies created by Chinman, and body, mind, intellect. Right? The same thing is as OET, it's observer, experience and thoughts. And another is PFT, perceiver, feeling and thinker. A perceiver, feeler and thinker. So these are all the dimensions of our personality. So those are the things that creates the world. But anyway, so once we realize that BMI, all those three things can be observed. The body can be observed. I can see my arms and legs and all that. So whenever you can observe something, it cannot be you. If I can observe you, obviously I am not you. And you are not me, vice versa. We are two separate entities. The same way when you can observe the body, you are separate than the body. When you observe the mind, I'm happy, I'm depressed, I'm jealous, that means you are not the mind either. And my intellect has made a decision that I want to be a doctor, or I want to be this, I want to be a pharmacist or engineer, whatever. So you are observing your intellect. So when you are observing all these things, it's not you. So your true nature is something else. So you are that consciousness that created this world. And so you are in that phase, then you cannot go any further backwards. You cannot observe the consciousness. You can be consciousness. And that's what we try to achieve in meditation. You cannot lose what you are, but you can always lose what you have. So body is a possession to you. Mind is a possession to you. Intellect is a possession to you. And all these things keep on changing. You might have same ideas at the age of 10 or 12 years of age, when all of a sudden with circumstances change and you have different ideas. You came in contact with some terrorist and say, okay, I want to be a terrorist. So all of a sudden you have a shift of your course in your life. You changes completely, right? So intellect changes, mind changes, body changes, all this change. But all those changes have to be observed by a steady medium. And that steady medium itself is you. And that cannot be observed by anybody else, because that's what you are. In meditation, you drop your identification of the body, of the mind, of the intellect. You still exist. That existence is you. And so that's what we have to realize, that our true swarup is the consciousness. then what is it all this about? All the whole world, what is it? It's basically a dream, and that's what we had another major discussion of what that this world that we see is a dream. Just like in the night when we create our own dreams, we create our characters. We let them interact with each other, right? And then at the end of the day, at the end of the night, when we wake up, the dream is gone. We created, we maintained, and we destroyed. So we became temporarily their God. We were the gods, for all the characters that were existing in our dream. So, but we realized when we wake up, there were no characters. There were no mountains. There were no rivers. There were no spaceships. Nothing. Everything was just imagination of the mind. And yet, we might have traveled thousands of miles. We might have flown in the sky. We could have traveled on the moon. You could have done all these things. And yet, you never left your bed. The same way, the consciousness is creating us, because from the equation we know energy is equal to E equal to mc square. So energy transforms itself into the mass. So the material world is created, the objects, the particles are created, the molecules are created, molecules get together, create us, and fractal system. And we talked about fractals last time. That was so fascinating. It says how this world came about, right? And the fractals are basically small size shapes, like basic formula. And that formula being multiplied millions and millions and millions and millions of times creates this world. And there was this show that me and Deepak saw that on a Nova. It was so beautiful. And they said that this guy had a revolutionary idea. He was a scientist, and he observed the shapes of the nature. And he says that all these shapes can be broken down. Say if there is an irregular shaped cloud, you want to put triangle in that, one triangle. But there will be a lot of space around will be left because it's an irregular shape. So how about if I put it in 5 triangles and try to fill it up? Still maybe a little bit left. So how about 1500 triangles? Ultimately it will fill up every single thing. So that means that cloud is made out of 1 million triangles, basically. That's it. So ultimate shape is the triangle. So that's how, and yet it's everywhere. And you see that basically in nature you see it's a replication of one small basic unit. And that he called fractal. So now we realize that these fractals have created this universe, right? So E equal to mc square. So material was created, and small these particles, atoms and subatomic particles and neutrons and protons and electrons, that's it. These were the building blocks. And the nature said, okay, you go and interact. And then interactions created the whole universe, basically, all these galaxies. And so such a simple thing. So because God cannot intervene at every single spot, but it basically can provide it's like an Excel sheet, right? In Excel you have a formula.
Yeah,
okay. Say, column A plus column B divided 2 should be the figures over here.
Yeah.
So in the Excel, every single line is basically follows that formula. So the same way, God has just put down the formula. Say, okay, these are the molecules, and you let them interact, and whatever happens. And that created all this beautiful universe, right? So the fractals are the basic units of the material world. But then our ancestors went further backwards. How were the fractals created? Right? How did the mass came into existence from the energy? So that's where all this spirituality comes in, and these are the basic units. So the dream itself that we come back to that was that we create our own dreams at the night, right? And then we dissolve them. Same way God says, okay, God himself is seeing this dream, right? The God is the consciousness. Now, on the first hand, we decided that we are the consciousness. We are not the BMI, we are not the body, we are not the mind, we are not the intellect, we are the consciousness. On the other hand, we are saying that this dream is the dream of the consciousness. But if we are the consciousness, that means this life also becomes our dream.